All right, good morning, friends. So Philip's kind of gone over some of our thrips and whitefly and aphids and all that kind of stuff. I have the luxury of going into a lot more detail with the research assignment on certain issues. Now, I certainly can't get the same coverage of all these different pests that Philip's going to show. What I'm going to give you is a lot more in-depth on one particular pest. And as you all know, the last couple of years I've shown a lot of data on stink bugs. We're going to talk a little bit today about border sprays and how we could potentially use those to manage these pests. So we got lots of stink bugs. Let's just pay attention to a couple of key pests. The southern green stink bug, it's probably our most common. That one also is important because we have multiple generations, 3 to 4 generations a year. That tends to build up over the course of the summer. The green stink bug's more common a little bit north of here. And then we've got our brown stink bugs, and they're a little bit tolerant of pyrethroid insecticides. So if you've got browns in the mix, and if you look at the last couple of years, that's been more than 50% of our species composition. You're going to need to be mixing in an OP like Bidrin. So we know that stink bugs are currently an economic issue for us. We know that brown stink bugs are tolerant, but we also know that if we rely too heavily on OPs, that we risk a secondary pest infestation. That would be like the Phillips spider mites, aphids if we're at that right point in the season. We also knock out everything else that's in the field. So all of our natural enemies, wasps, little fly parasitoids. If you put out a OP application, you've just wiped all those out. So we're looking for ways that we can mitigate stink bug infestations without having some of the negative effects that may or may not develop. As you all know, stink bugs emerge early in the spring. We get this typical feeding on cotton bolls, like a wart that's on there. We also get the lint staining, and that's a quality factor for us. Those populations tend to actually develop on non-crop hosts very early in the spring. And they can also transmit bull rot pathogens, and that can be a real yield limiter for us. This way. So typical damage signs again, this is evidence that you've really been eaten up here. This is a lesion on the outside of the bowl, and then of course a rotted lint lock that's not going to help us at all. So a couple of studies I'm going to throw at you today, and these are going to be in pretty rapid fire succession. One is the importance of planting date. So we talked about planting date from a thrip standpoint. In that case, we're better off to plant late because we get higher populations early. We talk about spider mites, and that may have an effect as well. In this particular case, I'm looking at planting date with respect to what's going to happen on the stink bug front. So we've got a couple of replicated plots, 3 different locations in Georgia. During bloom, I'm going to go through and collect 20 quarter-sized bowls. That's right in that sweet spot for where stink bugs are feeding on those things. And we're going to harvest that cotton at the end of the year. So this is what the data look like in a project like this. So I'm summarizing 3 studies over 3 locations in one slide. Here's my damage first week of bloom with a May 10 planting date. So this is first, second, third, fourth, and fifth weeks of bloom on that particular planting date. I've done this study 2 years. Our treatment threshold, now obviously we're using a dynamic threshold, but it's up here in the 10 to 15% range. So what I'm going to tell you, I can't guarantee you that if you plant early, you'll never see stink bugs, but this is an odds game. And the truth is, if you compare this line, here's my second plant date, which would be a May 24. You see that we were well below the threshold until about the 4th week of bloom. On my June planted cotton, I was way, way above it, and that's held up 2 years in a row. So the advice I have is if you end up in a situation where you have to plant late, and we all know that weather can dictate that, there's a lot of other things that go into that, you should be expecting that your damage level is going to be on this end of the curve as opposed to this end of the curve, and so you should really be expecting and watching out for stink bugs in a case like that. In terms of the yield and fiber quality that came out of that particular trial, here's the lint yield in those 2 May plant dates. We're up around 1,500 pounds of lint per acre, and it drops off pretty significantly. Now, part of this is a seasonal effect. We know that when you plant late, you're probably not going to expect the same types of yields, but some of that also is losses due to stink bugs. And the evidence for that in terms of the feeding damage is right here in this plus B, which is one of our measures of fiber yellowness. So the more stink bug feeding damage you have, the more yellow that lint's going to be. That's what we call that lint staining. What you see on here is that on my early plant date stuff, I'm down here, and then it jumps up right up in this area, and that's going to be an economic penalty for us when we go to sell it. What we've done is calculated economic returns on a lot of these data, and there's a significant penalty here. Not only are you yielding less lint, it's less valuable because it's got a lot of those yellow marks in it. So stuff you need to keep in mind. All right, this is a summary, again, of a number of different years where I'm looking at tracking stink bugs through the farmscape and where does cotton producer fall into all this. So up at the top here we got pheromone traps. This is just captures over trap over the entire year. So my scale here starts in January, ends in December. Got to put some marks in here to get my bearing. So this is the spring equinox, summer solstice, and the fall equinox. You see that overwintering traps, these guys are emerging, it looks like late March, early April, and those are just traps that are out on the ground where I'm catching them when they're coming out of duff on the field, on field edges. So these are the first emergence of the year. Then we jump into wheat, and you see there's just a little blip in there. There's about 1 month where I get a lot of brown stink bugs in wheat. Then we move on to corn, and you see that that's a real quick blip as well. We go to a peak, and then we're back out of there. And then down in here is where we really are managing stink bugs. We've got peanuts in here, we've got cotton, and then soybeans on the bottom. Soybeans tend to be my best host for stink bugs. That's where I get an entire generation that comes out. But we know that we've got a lot of stink bugs in cotton at different points in the year. What I want to illustrate is we've got this succession of hosts, and we're somewhere in the mix right in here. All right, last year I talked a little bit about stink bug movement from crop to crop, and so what this is kind of building up to is, does it make sense to be just treating certain areas of the field? So this is a quick study. We planted an acre of cotton, and then we planted an acre of soybeans on one side, an acre of peanuts on the other. Took my sprayer, and of course Philip's the good entomologist. He applies insecticides through his sprayer. I'm a little bit different. I'm applying soy milk, cow's milk, and egg whites through my sprayer. So I'm putting out a representative about 20 gallons to the acre of soy milk on the soybeans on a weekly basis, putting out 20 gallons of cow's milk on the cotton, and same with the egg whites. And then we're coming back through and we're sampling for those stink bugs, and we look for the presence of that particular protein, and the protein is the milk or the egg whites. And we're looking for where did we capture those, and where do we know that we marked them. So what I want to illustrate here, we've got different species here. This is the green stink bug. The first bar is insects that were marked in and recaptured in the same crop where we captured them. Then as you go farther on down the x-axis here, these are insects that were captured in a different crop. So in this particular case, it was on the border row of an adjacent crop, and this is going into cotton. So I've got the green stink bug, the brown stink bug, another brown stink bug, and then southern green. What I want to illustrate for you is a lot of them stayed put, which is what you would expect because we're sampling on a weekly basis. You know that they're moving around, but I wouldn't expect the whole group would get up and move every week. But the next most important bar in here is that first row on the adjacent crop. So what that's telling me is when they move, they're not likely to move a long ways into the field. This would be, we got meters on there, but you can convert that to yards as being just about equivalent. They're not moving a long ways into the field. They tend to move and stop right on the edge. So this sets up a situation where we know that we've got crops that have stink bugs in them, and we've got cotton in here, and we're saying, all right, does it make sense to spray this entire field, or does it make more sense to spray right in here? And this is a slide that Philip had shown me right when I came in 2006, looking at yields as a function of where you are along the edge there. I think Philip's even got a plane that flies across here. That's pretty cool. But if you look at the difference in yield, so we've got an 82% loss, 56, you see it gets better and better as you get farther into the field. So does it make sense to be treating just this region as opposed to the entire field? So the study I'm going to talk about for the rest of our time here together is looking at how do we gauge this sort of thing. So I've got a bunch of fields over the last 4 years that we've looked at entire fields on a weekly basis. We map them. We take all of our data on iPhones these days because it's a little bit less cumbersome than converting paper back to the computer. Every week I go in there, I take 50 sweeps and 10 bowls per acre. So if I'm in a 50-acre field, I just took 500 bowls every week during bloom. My application method is a great big old blast sprayer like I got from the boll weevil eradication folks. I pull that on a trailer so it's real convenient for me, and it blows about 30 to 40 foot into the fields. The border sprays, importantly, were not based on a threshold. They're at first week of bloom and second week of bloom, religiously. Doesn't matter what the bug activity is, that's what we're looking at. We put out 4 ounces of biodrin and 2 ounces of Baythroid. This is a typical curve that we see. This is an untreated field, and you see it, here's my percent boll damage. And I've got the samples broken up as to the samples that were on the edge of the field, which we know are always going to be higher. The samples in the middle of the field, that's the red dots, and then our average. So we kind of want to be looking at the average, generally speaking. Here's my 15% threshold, and you see that in the case of an untreated field, I was above it the entire way. I will say that my experience since 2006, almost without exception, every single field that I've scouted in this manner, where we're pulling that many bowls, will exceed threshold at least once during the course of the year. All right, here's a single border spray at second week of bloom. and 2 weeks later we were above threshold. I didn't really feel like that was a great situation, so we were going to change tactics here. From here on out, the rest of the research, I'm doing one application at first week of bloom, one application at second week of bloom, and I bring that sprayer with me when my crew goes to the field. So as soon as we're done scouting that second week of bloom, or as soon as we're done, we drive around the field with a mist sprayer and put it out there. That bought us 3 weeks. This particular field then exceeded threshold on week 5 of bloom, and we were clear for the rest of the year. To talk about how this develops in the course of the field, so this is basically like a satellite image type situation where you've got, these are all the places, this is 1 acre set apart, and as you get increasing diameter circles, that's where we have increasing damage. And so as we go through different weeks of bloom, see how these things kind of move out and cover along there. One thing I wanted to mention here, so this is on a pivot actually, got cow pasture up on this side, some weeds, and then peanut there. Look at how these things are just rafting up right there on that edge. That makes a lot of sense, so we're kind of concentrating on areas like that. 6th week of bloom, and we still see a lot of damage along there. This is a field in Turner County, another 55 acre. This was a real dry field, so I didn't get bolls 1 week of bloom. What you see in here, I got my 2 border sprays on there, and I never exceeded threshold for the rest of the time. By the time we get out to 7th week of bloom, our threshold's about 30%, but the fact that there were no bolls this week, that field was really drying down, it was fully mature, we felt like these bolls really weren't going to contribute to yield. So when you look at this again, had peanuts over on this side, had peanuts on this side, but see the stink bugs are distributing fairly well across there. We still get a little bit more damage on this side, I believe. 5th and 6th I had nothing, and 7th week of bloom, they're everywhere. But what I want to kind of emphasize with you is that in a case like this, we're real late in the year. These are those couple of bolls that just get up there on the top of the plant. We had a rain. I don't know if it was right at the 6th week, but it was a little bit before, a little bit after. So we had a big rain, and when we went back to 7th week, then we had all these little sucker bolls on the top of the plant. Well, they get hit to the end of the world. I mean, those things really, really got hit. Our average damage here was 30% plus. But those bolls are not going to contribute to yield that late in the year. We've already set the crop, so we didn't worry about these guys. This is a 54 acre field down at Nashville, 2 border sprays. Home free rest of the year. Man, I'd love to see us be able to do that year in and year out. It's not always a situation where I can guarantee that 2 border spray is going to do it. I know that that's not the case, but I think that's one approach we could use. This is a control field that just got a whole field application, and you see that it made it all the way to the 5th week of bloom before we exceeded that threshold. In this case, 1 shot, we were in and out, very good. So that's 1 whole field application, pretty manageable economically, and good yield on that one. This one was a control field, and it exceeded the threshold right away at the 2nd week of bloom, but that bought us 3 weeks. I think there's something magical about this 3 weeks, because what I see is my best treatments. I'm going after these guys with Bidern and a pyrethroid. This is a full-blown treatment, whether it's a border spray or a whole field. And the whole field, by the way, were just put out with a ground rig. There's nothing fancy there. I can get about 3 weeks, control them, and then we're back down under our threshold. 25 acre field, and I can kind of go on ad nauseum. We've been working on this project 4 years, but the trends are pretty clear. In the cases where we use border sprays, we tend to get our 2 border sprays down, tends to buy us about 3 weeks. We're generally going to need an application about 5th week of bloom. We're through, if we need it at all. About half the time we don't need it, about half the time we do. If I use what I term the solid spray approach, which is just using our dynamic threshold, conventional management, you're looking at 1 to 2 sprays a year. If it's a, quote, bad year, 2 sprays, you'll need 1 a little bit earlier in the season, and a second one a lot of times back out here. And again, note that 3 weeks in there. All right, so I've cruised right through this. I'm trying to get you all through. Our stink bugs are clearly moving from crop to crop and within those fields. Whole field applications are very efficacious. There's no doubt about it. You put out Bidern, you're going to take care of stink bugs. But I think that this border approach is something that we all should be considering because it confers a lot of benefits. You're not using all the AI and all the time to hit the whole field. We're not killing all the natural enemies. We don't have near as many opportunities for secondary pests like spider mites to blow up on us. We tend to get that 3-week suppression window, and in light years that may be all that we need. And for reference point, you talk about, all right, well, I got to get to every field 2 times. What's going to happen here? Okay, so my 26-acre field, that took me 10 minutes to get around with my little mist sprayer. You see the times on the different ones there. And then there's the total amount of AI that I sprayed. So on that 55-acre field, when I tank mixed in my sprayer, I mixed up for 4.5 gallons. So I think there's significant insecticide savings in addition, significant time and insecticide savings in addition to the fact that we're getting by with, 2 quick trips around the field. Before I let you go, I do want to point out that this kind of work takes a lot of folks, and I got an army of undergraduates that are helping us. And very importantly, this type of work doesn't take place on a university budget. This is Cotton Incorporated, this is Georgia Cotton Commission, this is federal sources, this is pretty high intensity stuff. And I certainly appreciate their help. And if anytime you get a chance to advocate for us, this is what we do with research dollars. All right. If we got opportunity for a question or two, I know everybody's got to run, but I'd be happy to stick behind or whatever. Yep.
Do you think that boulder sprays are going to be as efficacious in a 10-acre field versus a 50-acre field? How would field size?
Okay, so the question is about field size, and this becomes a question of geometry. When you look at little fields, the first year I did this in 2006 and 7, I bit off little fields because I thought, man, I can get my crew through there faster. So we did 15, 20-acre fields. The whole field acts like edge. They get reinfested quicker. They tend to, the damage doesn't stay on the edge as quick. It gets through because it's coming from both sides. So on a small field, I don't think it's as good of an idea. On these big fields, and that's the reason we went to 50, 60-acre fields, despite the fact my crew really doesn't like it, that's where I think we see the benefit. Great question. Great question.